In this video, I'm going to show you how I restored my entire house from being this destroyed to how it is now. Repairing walls, openings, laying a floor, new furniture, and much more.
But all of this while trying to spend as little money as possible.
You probably know it because this had been my previous house. In fact, I had made a video remodeling the yard and the living room. But several years ago I moved and the house had been practically abandoned. So I set out to do a complete renovation from top to bottom. First I started with the walls. Even before I bought them, they were full of holes, dents, and uneven spots due to their age. For that, I simply filled them in with plastic filler. Although for the pronounced holes or dents, the filler, when it dries, it sinks in. To avoid this, a little trick is to use this, a hard paper tape. What we're going to do is soak the tape with plastic filler and stick it on the wall. In this way, we're covering all those holes and ugly parts. This may seem very improvised or of poor quality, but this tape was actually made especially for this. And if you have, for example, plaster or drywall walls, then they are full of this tape even if you don't know it.
Although you can also use plaster that does not shrink when it dries, but preparing it is much more difficult as it sets quickly and you have to work it just as fast because it hardens immediately.
Once it has dried, we can sand the filler and leave the wall smooth. I sanded it by hand using 120 grit sandpaper and a tacket. I bought several 120 grit sandpapers since I used them for the entire house. These are the Bremen ones that don't clog, making them ideal for filler and such. I entered the kitchen. The tiles were nice, but the countertop wasn't. So I cleaned them and put in new grout. And I bought paste grout because it was easier to apply. And I bought one that could be applied over old grout. We simply applied it with a spatula all over the joints. And when it dries a bit, we scrape it to make it smooth. And in the process, we remove any excess that remains. After that, I continued disassembling everything. First, I removed all the baseboards because they were horrible. To make matters worse, the screws were in plain sight and screwed in. Well, it was a mess. I had the idea to leave the space completely open without any furniture, so it would look bigger. Under the stairs, there was a kind of stored furniture that I had made a long time ago. And I took it out because the truth is that it was in very bad condition. And besides, it wasn't used, it took up space. In short, I didn't like it. So I kept everything, and I also had to remove a plaster structure that was there like a countertop. One of the huge problems this house had was that it had a lot of humidity. This caused the door to rot, and part of the window, but especially the door, since it didn't even close, it was tied with a chain and a padlock. In fact, I ripped it off and it came out in one go. I also removed the entire door frame by hitting it with a mallet. We need to make a hole big enough for the new door to fit in. I kept it simple and bought the same door that was there, which happened to be on sale. I presented it in the hole and left it as straight as possible. You can do this using a plumb line or a laser level. To fix it in place, I prepared a cement mixture in 3 pots of water to make a common concrete, and in the mixture I added 10% in the water of cherry waterproofing, in this case,
so that the moisture does not pass from outside to inside.
Using a silicone applicator gun, obviously without silicone, I was putting all the cement there between the joints of the door and the wall, and by the way, I also used pieces of rubble to put there and make it more firm. It has to be as neat as possible. You can level it on the outside so that it is very smooth. A curious fact, while I was working there, I found this blind cat. I didn't live there, but I left it in the house so that at least it wouldn't be on the street and something could happen to it. And I posted signs around the neighborhood to see if we could find the owner, and indeed we were able to find the owner. So, happy ending there. The roof for some reason had a huge hole, but it was because a piece of plaster had come off. Surely it must have had some moisture at some point, and this piece fell off. To repair it, what I did was first remove everything that was loose, and then screw a bunch of screws one next to the other, so that the new material won't fall off. We used plaster for a more consistent result. We mixed the plaster with water and applied it quickly as it hardened. I did it in about 3 coats, for example, and then all that remains is to sand it and make it even with the rest of the ceiling. Do you remember I told you that the window was also bad? Well, it seems that the problem was that the window's drain had been blocked and the rainwater, instead of falling outside, was falling inside, rotting the wall and the window itself. I had to hammer it to get it back to its original position and with quite an effort, remove the window. Then, using a metal brush, I gradually removed all the rust until I was left with just the bare sheet, although with a hole clearly from all the rust it had. First of all, I painted everything with a paint that prevents the rust from spreading and reoccurring. Once it was dry, I applied cold welding to recreate the window, so to speak. This welding contains steel, so it's essentially like filling with metal. I simply molded it following the shape of the window with the same guides and grooves. When it was already dry, I sanded it to make it a bit better and painted it again. It ended up like this. It's not that it turned out excellent, but we stopped the rust and the window is now working. I think it's much more convenient than changing the entire window, as that would have been not only a lot of work, but a lot of money. The kitchen was completely destroyed from top to bottom. I began by removing the bottom cabinet, but quickly noticed the top one was also ruined. It had to be changed.
I also took it out and measured each one.
With these measurements, I bought an 18mm black melamine board, and when you buy it, you can ask them to cut it for you, so I sent them all the measurements of my previous flight and that's it. Really, with the Fords, it's very easy. We just screw one with another in the same way as the original flights, and to finish, we put the edge banding, in this case, a black edge banding. In a moment, I will explain my decision to make them black. The marble of the countertop was also broken, and I really didn't want to change it because a marble for a countertop is worth a lot of money. And here comes the video's first fail. The bottom furniture might have been a few centimeters off, possibly due to my own measurement error. Larger than the countertop's marble measurement. I had to redesign the entire piece of furniture and cut it, but I chose a better option. I 3D printed a replacement piece for the missing part of the countertop using measurements I took. In fact, this gave me the opportunity to, for example, make it with a rounded tip. I screwed these pieces onto the piece that was still missing there. And there you have it, problem solved.
Yes, I know it looks terrible.
But later on, I'm going to tell you why this is going to turn out really well. This is a little trick I can use to make the doors look better. We simply use these wooden moldings and cut them. The idea is to form two rectangles on the door that are about 80% of the door. We cut them at a 45-degree angle at the ends so they fit well, and we glue them to the door using any molding glue. Once dry, we paint it white to match the door's color. And look how it turns out. I think it's a very cheap trick that we can use to add some value to the house. The floor of the house was a floating floor that had been there for who knows how many years. But clearly it had already completed its life cycle. But before removing it, I took the opportunity to paint, so whatever was ruined would end up on the floor. Before painting, as I already told you, I plastered all the walls and filled all the holes with paper tape. You have to sand the walls so they become very smooth. And here I want to make a very important parenthesis. I usually save on many things, but I recommend using a good paint. I know it can turn out more or less 5 times what a cheap paint is worth, but believe me, it's worth it. For example, in many parts of the house, I only gave it 1 coat of paint. In the room with a grey wall, I only needed 2 coats to cover it. Plus, it's more consistent to apply and you save a lot of time. Since this house is going to be sold, I painted everything white. I didn't look to give it any design since white is what most people like. And it also makes the house much brighter, and that's very important. And now, with everything painted, we can take out the floating floor. Here, I considered several flooring options. I've put in floating floors, ceramic, and also micro cement, and honestly, none of them are complicated to install as such. But talking about costs, the micro cement was not only the cheapest of all, but it's what's being used now, what's becoming fashionable, let's say, what was going to give the house the most value. I bought micro cement but in paste form since many people want it in powder, and this way I save myself the trouble of preparing it. It costs about the same, so it's more convenient. The process is as follows. First, we apply the leveling base. The best advice is not to try to do it all at once. We will definitely have to apply 2 coats, and this way we will also save more product. Using a trowel, we apply the first coat, and we keep spreading and spreading it until we get the thinnest and most even layer possible. Then we apply another coat exactly the same way, and you'll see that with this second coat, the entire floor will be nice and smooth. If necessary, you can apply a 3rd coat. And now we're going to apply the micro cement as such. If you want it white, you can apply it just as it comes. But I wanted to give it color. So I bought a common black paint dye and applied it little by little until I achieved the color I wanted. I recommend you start with a kitchen scale. They put in 4 grams of dye. This way, if you have to mix several batches, like in my case, they all come out the same color. Before applying it, we sand with 120 grit sandpaper, the leveling base to remove trowel marks and other imperfections that may have been left. And we apply in the same way, 2 coats. Very thin coats, sanding between each coat, you should end up with a very even surface. Now we're going to apply the sealer and lacquer, and here I do have several tips to give you. The first one, don't even think about stepping on the floor with sneakers or similar, as it will stain immediately. It's super porous and then you'll have to sand it and even reapply. The second one is to wear a cap and some suit or long pants, socks and all that, as while you work you shed hair, at least I do, and the hair then stays on the floor, and removing it is super difficult. Imagine having a floor with hair. And now, if you give it the first coat of sealer, then 2 to 3 coats of polyurethane lacquer, and that's it. Let it dry between coats for about a day. The floor looks very good and shiny, which will make our environment look much brighter. Remember the countertop we had patched that I said we were going to fix? The countertop marble was cracked, so to fix it, I had to change it. That marble is typical of an old house, no longer used and looks unattractive. I gathered the cracked marble and glued it to prevent curling. Using leftover floor crossing material, I applied the same protein, starting with 2 coats of leveling base on the countertop. Then I applied untinted micro cement, including on the edges up to the wall. And once done, I gave it 3 coats of polyurethane lacquer, and that's how I ended up practically with leftover recycled work. We made the countertop for free. And now we have one that could improve. Let's not forget that it didn't cost us anything, and it looks very good to finish. I placed the new baseboards, common and ordinary white baseboards, that simply support them and stick them with a baseboard adhesive, and that's it. And as you can notice, I chose to do everything in very light colors, as these make everything look brighter, and I insist on this because it's what people always look at when buying a house.
But obviously we can't do this blatantly, because it would also look bad.
That's why I made the kitchen furniture black. This contrasts with so much white and light colors and creates a harmonious atmosphere. If you notice, the floor is also gray, so everything is on the same scale, so to speak, but there is still a lot to do, and I have several more tips to continue beautifying the house with small details. The exteriors like the patio and the terrace are also missing, but I will show all of that in the next video. Thanks for watching, and remember to subscribe to stay updated.